welcome out. Here we are. This is maybe our final or close to final entry for the Constitution. We looked at the 7 acts to begin with, right? Then we look at the Federalist Papers, and then we looked at the Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments. Now we're looking at the rest of the amendments, 11 through 27. So passing amendments, very difficult, as you can see here. There have been literally thousands of amendments proposed. Only 27 have been passed. Why is that? Well, it's complicated, and that's true. It is complicated. In order to propose an amendment, you need 2/3 of Congress, and then in order to ratify that amendment, you need 3/4 of the states to ratify amendments. All right, so very difficult, very involved. It is complicated, and it's complicated for a reason. The framers intended it to be difficult. The Constitution is the law of the land. This is serious stuff. Changes shouldn't be made for light and transient reasons, right? Very important that these amendments, if considered and passed, ratified, have to be very thoroughly gone over, and they have to be essential. But you also have an issue of political division. The higher the partisan division, the more difficult it is to pass amendments. That also is a major factor. But 10,000 amendments, right? 218 years, only 17 amendments have been added to the Constitution. That's only 1 per 12.8 years, okay? So not easy to do. And people talk about getting rid of the Constitution. Good Lord, look how difficult it is to amend the Constitution. If you want to get rid of the Constitution, you probably have to go through the same procedure. It would have to go through Congress. You have to get 2/3 of Congress, and then you have to get 3/4 of the states to ratify it, right? Propose it and then ratify it. So probably not going to happen. And if people really understood the Constitution and the Electoral College, again, I've heard people say this election cycle the same thing. The Electoral College is a piece of garbage. It's counterproductive. It's this and that and whatever. This and that and the other thing needs to be gone, right? For so many reasons, no. Again, it's not a perfect system, the Constitution, or anything within the Constitution, the Electoral College specifically, but it's the best we've got. And nobody has come up with a better idea. Nobody has proposed in all this time, over 200 years, a better idea. So we're sticking with it, folks, right? 2 methods you can use to add an amendment. One has been used for all 27 current amendments. Amendment is proposed, as I said, by 2/3 of both houses of Congress. Then it goes to each state and is approved in 3/4 of the states. So first it has to be proposed by 2/3 of Congress, right? It has to go through the House and then to the Senate. 2/3 accept it as a proposal. Then in order to ratify it or okay it, or to make it so, you have to go through 3/4 of the states. All right, 3/4 of the states have to agree to it. That's quite a large number of those who agree, right? It's very difficult to get that many people, especially of varying parties or differing parties, partisanship, to agree on an amendment, right? Number 2, Constitution, you can have a convention. You can propose a convention by 2/3 of the state legislature. Then it goes to each state and is approved in 3/4 of the states. So you can have a constitutional convention, and that method hasn't been used yet. I don't know if it's been proposed, even, to be honest. I'd have to look that up. 11th Amendment explains what must happen for a citizen of one state to sue another. As we know, even though there is federal law, constitutional law, and the courts, the Supreme Courts interpret that law, and the laws and their interpretation change and vary from time to time, depending on the courts and how they lean left, right, center. Um, you know, excuse me, but the states differ. As long as they're obeying the basic law of the land, the Constitution, the states can differ and do differ, and you probably are aware of this, in how they handle things, right? For abortion is one issue. Abortion was at the states and then went to the federal level, and now it's back to the states. So how each state is going to handle abortion varies and differs, right? And that's just one issue. Any issue that comes up. When we had COVID, how COVID was handled varied from state to state, right? Depending on local politicians and the governor, what the governor wanted to do. Governor is the head officer in times of emergency, such as COVID. Explains process of electing our president, and if you don't know how that works, something to look up. Remember the Electoral College? All right, got All right, the Electoral College. So you think it goes state by state, but it actually goes county by county. And you can have, within a state that goes blue, you can have a bunch of counties that are red, but more are blue, and vice versa with a state that goes red. But ultimately, the majority of those voting in a particular state go to a particular party. And for instance, Kansas here, the Republican Party won, 6 electoral votes go to them, goes to the Republicans. Here, Colorado, the Democrats win, so 9 goes to the Democrat Party. Then you have to have a 270 majority on the current, what was the current total, like 315 or something like that to 226, I forgot what it was. But anyways, that's basically how it works, right? There's other issues and things we can talk about, but I don't want to say too much because I'll be getting ahead of myself, right? Explains the process of electing our president. The next 3 amendments are called the Civil War Amendments. Slavery is officially ended. And what's interesting is that 1865, it wasn't until, and there's a couple of amendments that, and we'll get to those in next 2 actually. There were a couple of amendments, 14th, 15th Amendment, right? There was a couple of amendments that should have made this whole, okay? Slavery is officially ended. Blacks should have, they got their physical freedom, but they did not get their political freedoms or their political rights, right? 14th Amendment describes the civil rights of each citizen, taking away the 3/5 statement. 3/5 statement used to be, and remember there was an issue with slavery. The southern states still wanted slavery. Northern states did not. Of course, 1865 came along, and this is why this was ratified in 1868, right? 1865 came along and you had the Civil War to fight over that issue. That was one of the issues. There were others, but that was the main one. Ratified in 1868, right? So the Constitution, one of the issues was, we need to get rid of slavery now. Let's do it before we ratify the Constitution. And doing that, the slavery issue was very complicated and very difficult to manage. So instead, they came up with a 3/5 rule, that those who were slaves were considered, when they were counting populations, those who were slaves were considered 3/5 of a person. So there's your inherent racism, right, in the Constitution. But these racist issues, such as the poll tax, another issue, which was done away with, which was racist, which was used to disenfranchise Black voters, right? So many of these racist issues were there at a time, right? and then were handled as time passed. Okay, and of course the Civil War took care of a great portion of the slavery issue, right? The major portion of the slavery issue. And this is post-war Civil War, so it's looking to handle these situations, right? 15th Amendment states that race cannot be a qualification for voting. And you would think, okay, so now it looks like, you know, blacks are freed physically. Also, you know, your race doesn't matter. So blacks can now vote. And these amendments were supposed to take care of these issues, but they did not. That's why we hear about, you know, the Civil Rights Act. Martin Luther King, who was very much involved in getting the Civil Rights Act passed. Civil Rights Act of 1964. So you can see almost 100 years later, right? Well, the end of the Civil War was 1865. And we go to 1964, 65. 1965 was the Voters' Rights Act, right? Why did you have to have a Voters' Rights Act if you've got race cannot be a qualification for voting, right? Because those things didn't stick, mostly due to Southern states and the Jim Crow laws and, you know, the continuous fighting against the laws that were put in place by the Constitution. So eventually those had to be squashed, and they were to a great degree by the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voters' Rights Act of 65, right? So it had to come through again. It had to be the issue of rights for any people of any color, specifically mostly black in this case, Civil Rights Act, to, you know, have all rights, not just the right to vote, but the right to work, the right to safety, the right to insurance, the right to education, the rights, right? So that took some time. It took some time. And we'll talk about women's rights as well in a minute when we get to that amendment. Created the income tax. And aren't we all glad that this happened? 1913 was when, and it doesn't mention here, Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into being, 1913. At the same time, the income tax was created, right? Why is that? That's weird. What's tax got to do with the Federal Reserve or the main bank, right? And money and revenue for the country. Well, as I told you before, banks don't have any money. Whether it's the local banks, whether it's private banks or public banks, or the central bank, the Federal Reserve, they don't have money. Where does that money come from? It has to be borrowed, right? In order to pay for things, if money is needed to pay for things, or it's borrowed for whatever purpose, mostly to pay for things, you know, give the citizens some money, or to pay for roads, or to pay for highways and byways and railroads and infrastructure and whatever, right? That costs money, but the government doesn't have any money. The Federal Reserve doesn't have any money. So it creates these loans or monetized debt that has to be paid through taxes, but there's definitely not enough money in the general citizenry, or those who are working, the working citizenry. There's not enough money in those taxes to pay for the trillions and trillions of dollars, right? So it has to be paid some way, somehow, somewhere. So that money has to be borrowed again. So they borrow it from the wealthy individuals from overseas. We can invest in bonds and T-bills and things like that. We talked about this before. I'm gonna have to do a little lengthier presentation on money and the origins of money. Where does money come from, and what is money? Does the government print bills and coins, you know, mint coins? It does, but that's not the main source. That's only about 5% of all money when we're talking that which you use to pay for stuff, right? Money. Dollars and coins, that's about 5% of all the money in circulation. 95% of the money used by our government, individuals, banks, and businesses, all borrowed, right? So, and that money borrowed, and I did a presentation on this. If you go to the econ section or the econ list there, it's about 150 total. I know our government debt is what, 33, 34 trillion, but the total debt owed by those four entities, by us, by banks, by the government, and by businesses, all four together, including unfunded debt or debt that has not been paid for yet, because the government, like individuals, overextends itself. And that's often done as promises to keep the people voting happy, but people don't really understand how money works. And I swear that a lot of this is not taught in schools, or you don't have to be certified or tested to understand, make sure that you understand this stuff for a reason. You know, they don't want you to know, so that they can get away with things, so that they can borrow too much money, borrow excessively, and put us into hawk and put us into serious dire straits at times. I mean, now we're at a situation where the debt is so high, it's astronomical. How much it's gone up since maybe, I'd say in the last probably 50 years or so, right? It's gone up astronomically in the last 50 years. How are we going to pay for it? Do we want to get the debt down? Does the debt have to be paid? And again, yeah, you can go to those econ videos and check that out, right? So income tax, in order to pay for things, again, the government doesn't have money, so it has to go to the citizenry, right? And anytime our government at the, there's state tax and there's federal tax, those taxes are used to pay for things, right? Of interest, the following states have no state income tax: Alaska, Florida, Nevada, South Dakota, Texas, Washington, and that's why many people in California have moved to mostly Texas, since that's the closest non-income tax state. But taxes, if you look at your, what is the home taxes on the home and other taxes, it may not be an income tax, but there's taxes because you have to pay for stuff, right? So taxes on your house are pretty high from what I hear. But anyways, so again, it's not that you're getting away tax-free. Each one of those states has to pay for stuff. So it doesn't have a state income tax, but it finds some way of taxing individuals in the state or those states to pay for things, right? There's no, what is it now? I heard this in one of my econ classes. There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Nothing's given away for free. You're not going to be tax-free. You're going to be taxed somehow. You don't get an education for free. That's tax, right? You don't get Medicare, Medicaid, or insurance for free. That's tax, and even if your student loan is forgiven, that is basically, and that's illegal, and I've talked about that before. Even if a student loan is forgiven, it's got to be paid somehow. The people who are depending on that money to pay for their salaries and their basic core needs, that money has to come from somewhere. So what happens is that the responsibility of the payment for those student loans basically goes from the individuals who took out the student loan to the general taxed population, right? So that charge for those loans just is distributed kind of in a hidden tax. People see their taxes go up, they don't really know why. So be aware of these things. Knowing these things in regards to laws and to economic principles, they're essential to know. for your own sanity, for your own financial welfare and solvency, and also to make sure that you're voting into office people who do the right things by us. Sadly, it's been stated time and time again that the majority of decisions made by politicians who are just doorkeepers, they don't really have any power. Do they have billions of dollars? No. Whoever has the money wins. They run things, right? So they're beholden to their base, right? I remember one time George Bush Jr. Was looking out amongst the crowd, and he said, "Ah, my base," right? So the donors, right? In order to get into office, to stay in office, move up in office, you need millions and millions of dollars. I remember Hillary when she was running. I think her campaign for president cost like $1 billion. It's not cheap, right? Being a politician running for office is not cheap, so it's got to come from somewhere. And most politicians, 90% are not wealthy. Some are, but most are not. So they go to the wealthy, right? And that's why we have lobbyists. We're looking for money. Let's go to the money people and see if we can get things that we want or need to get done, right? Or the lobbyists will come into the Capitol, Washington D.C. and say, "Hey, politician, our company needs the following, blah blah blah. You want to get elected again? How about you say we donate X amount of dollars to help you out, and then you help us out," right? That type of thing. 17th Amendment describes the election of senators to Congress, now by the people. Used to be the state legislatures. A lot of people aren't aware of this, right? So that was changed. Ratified in 1913 again. A lot going on in 1913, back in the day. Bans the manufacture, sale, transportation of any alcohol in the United States. How did that work out? Well, we'll find out in one of the next amendments. Gives women the right to vote in the elections. There it is, 1920. If you know anything about, and I always tell my students that any woman who does not have Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony tattooed somewhere on their personage is missing out on who really helped them to not only get the right to vote, but to get the right to earn a living, go to college, and pretty much everything else, right? Because before 1920, women didn't have a lot of those rights, and it was the passing of the right to vote for women that really helped women move forward towards greater rights, obtaining and getting that which was due to them, right? Since they are American citizens. The suffragette movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, again, you can look that up and read about that, began in 1850, right? Woodrow Wilson, he was president in 1913, didn't care about helping women. He didn't care about helping minorities. He had a real problem. But eventually, women just kept working, especially those two women working for all women. And somebody in my class one time says, "Well, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were racists." Well, at the time, the only women that they were looking to help was white women, right? Racism was still an issue, and of course, over time, that changed, and all women eventually were able to vote. So it took about 70 years, right? 70 years and this is why I tell my students that it takes a long time for things to change. 1865, Civil War's over. Blacks received their physical freedom, but it wasn't, even though you had the 14th and 15th Amendments, it wasn't until 1964, 1965, with the Civil Rights Act and the Voters' Rights Act, that blacks began to receive their rights, their political rights, 100 years later, right? And for women, 70 years later. It took 70 years. As a matter of fact, I remember reading about the fact that there was only one woman only one left from the start of the suffragette movement in 1850, who was able to see the right to vote. She was there was only one woman from the start of the movement who actually was able to go out and vote. Kind of sad. So history, to get things done, sometimes it can take a very, very long time, decades, if not a century or more, right? So keep that in mind for all you impatient people. 20th Amendment describes the process between the election and when the new president officially takes office. Travel, not a major concern anymore. So this moved up the date of, I think this is called the lame duck amendment, because of the fact that once the new president is elected, such as Trump in this case, Biden is now a lame duck. He has no power. So he's just hanging out until January 20th, right? When things will be officially changed. But it used to be March. So there was a real downtime, almost a half a year between the president getting elected and the president getting into office, right? Now, it was moved up. There's still a little bit of wiggle room, but it takes time to make changes. The president has to elect his cabinet members, and we'll take a look. That's there it is, right? Also details the order of succession to the presidency if not able to leave. If the president dies in the meantime, the order of succession will be taken care of through the 20th Amendment. So I don't know if that provision has ever been used, but he's got to pick his cabinet. He's got to go out there, get the Speaker of the House, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Defense, Attorney General. All those selections have to be made. Also, the VP of the current party has to go into the Senate and tally up state by state all the electoral votes, right? That's another. So there's certain housekeeping things that need to be taken care of over the next couple months before the new president moves in. So there's a little bit of wiggle room is needed. 21st Amendment erases the 18th Amendment. There it is, the prohibition of alcohol. How did that work? As I said before, not well. It became illegal. This is where stock car racing came from. You know about that? It became illegal to sell alcohol. So you had all these speakeasies and all these distilleries that were out in the woods. And you hear about this, like what was that, the movie The Bandit or something about this guy? Who was he? Has this stock car that was really fast, and that's where stock cars came from. In order to outrun the police, they souped up these cars, modified them so they were faster than the police cars, and that's where stock car racing came from. And then they had up all these souped up cars after the 18th Amendment, 21st Amendment was passed, right? And they said, what are we going to do with all these cars now? Hey, let's race, right? That's where stock car racing came from, of all things, right? So because it was illegal, it went underground. And when you go underground, who's going to take care of that stuff? Who's going to take care of the underground illegal stuff, right? Mafia and other underlings of society, I guess we could say, right? So a lot of corruption, a lot of crime came out of the 18th Amendment, right? So that after a while, they just said, okay, let's go back to selling alcohol, right? 22nd limits a president to 2 consecutive terms. This guy had 4, right? If you don't know, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And before that, I don't know of any president that had more than 2 before the 22nd Amendment, before 1951. But before 1951, you could be voted into office again and again and again, obviously. So that was done away. 23rd Amendment, ratified in 1961, gives the District of Columbia 3 electoral college votes. What is the District of Columbia? It's basically an area, it's where the government resides. right? It's like the government's own little district, its own little piece of land. It's run by Congress. It's owned and run by Congress. So because of that, if you lived there, you couldn't vote, right? And after a while, people said, we can't vote, come on, let's fix this thing, right? So eventually you were able to vote, and that district got 3 electoral college votes. A little bit of history for you. 24th makes any tax to vote, poll tax illegal. Poll tax was basically, if you went to the polls to vote, there was a tax. And unfortunately, it was a uniform tax somewhat. And unfortunately, it was used by many states in the South to disenfranchise Black voters. So that was done away with. Another ratification or amendment that worked hard to eliminate, to limit, if not eliminate, racism. Right. 25th Amendment sets up the process for replacing the president in case there is a death or illness. Pretty straightforward. 26th Amendment, 1971, ratified. It's not too long ago. Gives all 18-year-olds the right to vote in elections. So, and that's universal. That's across the country. Then 27th, 1992, very recent. Any increase in pay for legislators must take place after an election. And that would be the election of those to the House. So what it meant was that you would have to, if you wanted a raise, if those in the House or the Senate or the judiciary, mostly Congress though, those of Congress, if they wanted a raise, they would have to wait a couple of years. Because imagine, you get elected into office, and like now it looks like the Republicans are taking over the House and the Senate. Imagine they get into office and go, hey, what's the first thing you want to do? Let's give ourselves a raise. Maybe they don't deserve it, right? So it's a little bit of a grace period, a couple of years. Maybe so they can build up some experience and get some, seasoning behind them, under their belt, we should say. It's not perfect. It's a good idea. It's not fail safe, but it's a good idea. And I think that's it. That's the end. So that's it for now. At some point I want to go over. I want to continue to work on the Federalist Papers for the strong executive, because that was, as I said before, the House and Senate, the essays that focused on the House and the Senate were not really argumentative. It was just kind of laying out the basic lay of the land. What's the schematics? What are the rules and regulations for House and Senate, right? But the executive was new because executive was important because they needed a strong central government and a strength. Well, the government resides in the executive branch or the president. And what's interesting is people think that the executive branch is just the president. It's actually the largest branch of the 3. There's literally thousands and thousands of people that work under the executive branch. Look it up sometime. Anyways, that's it for now. So until next time, take care.